I call this meeting of the Commerce, Justice, and Science Subcommittee to order. Welcome to the markup of the fiscal year 2022 Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies Appropriations Bill. As this is a hybrid markup, we must address a few housekeeping matters first. For today's markup, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition for the purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If I notice that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. After my opening statement, I will recognize Ranking Member Adderholt for his opening statement, then turn to Chair DeLauro and Ranking Member Granger for any statements they wish to make. Following that, I will recognize any members who wish to make statements. Additionally, House rules require me to remind you that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups, including amendments, motions, other unanimous consent requests, and so on. That email address has been provided to your staff. I would remind all members that they must verbally request unanimous consent separately from sending a written UC request to that email address. In a moment, I will talk about the bill itself, but first I'd like to thank my colleague, Mr. Adderholt, for his hard work and his collaboration with me on this bill. I know we don't agree on everything, but I am heartened by the number of matters where we were able to collaborate and work together, and I do appreciate his cooperation and partnership in helping to produce this bill. Mr. Adderholt's input is certainly reflected throughout it. I also want to thank the chair of the full committee, Ms. DeLauro, for all of her leadership and hard work in helping our committee abide by this very ambitious schedule of committee markups as we work to move 12 appropriations bills through the House of Representatives. Thank you as well to Ranking Member Granger for the work that she has contributed to all of this. The Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriations Bill we have put forward for the fiscal year 2022 will help us build a more prosperous, safe, and competitive America for all of us. It includes a net discretionary spending total of $81.3 billion. It's an increase of just over $10 billion, or 14%, above fiscal year 2021, in order to fund the wide array of federal programs and activities that fall under this subcommittee's jurisdiction, from economic development and support for manufacturers to weather forecasting, climate research and resilience efforts, to space exploration and scientific research, to fighting crime, protecting civil rights, and improving policing and the criminal justice system. Our CJS appropriations bill impacts every American and is a force for good in so many ways. And I'd like to touch on some of the many highlights of this very important bill. First, this bill helps preserve and create jobs in distressed areas throughout our nation by providing strong funding increases for a number of related programs and agencies. It includes the Economic Development Assistance Grants, the Minority Business Development Agency, and the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program, which assists small and medium-sized U.S. manufacturers. The bill further helps create jobs by expanding U.S. exports and fighting the unfair trade practices of other countries, including through sizable funding increases for the International Trade Administration and International Trade Commission. We also provide solid funding levels for federal law enforcement, including funding for enhanced civil rights enforcement, counterterrorism initiatives, efforts to combat cyber criminals, enhanced environmental law enforcement, and efforts to fight gun violence, among other initiatives. Strong funding is also provided for state and local law enforcement, including the COPS hiring program and the Burn Justice Assistance Grant Formula Program. At the same time, this bill takes very seriously our obligation not only to help fight crime, but to also ensure that our systems of policing and criminal justice work effectively for all Americans. The bill places strong conditions on the awarding of law enforcement grant funds, especially under the COPS and Burn JAG programs. Before receiving these funds, jurisdictions need to have an array of laws in place to ensure their police practices are just and humane as they serve and protect everyone in their communities. The bill also provides $100 million in new grant funding for investigations into law enforcement patterns and practices, as well as $42 million for improved police training. The bill also funds civilian review boards, a national police misconduct registry, and a national task force on law enforcement oversight. The bill provides strong funding levels for community-based violence intervention initiatives and for youth mentoring grants, as well as for the First Step Act and Second Chance Act to help formerly incarcerated individuals transition back into society. These are only a few examples of the ways in which this bill will help institute real reform of our systems of policing and criminal justice. The bill helps fight the growing problem of hate crimes in our society by providing $70 million under the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. This will help state and law enforcement conduct educational outreach and training on hate crimes and to investigate and prosecute them. An additional $30 million is also provided for community organizations for efforts to prevent hate crimes. We provide substantial resources in this bill to address the opioid epidemic plaguing our society. Strong increases are provided for grant programs under the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act, including for drug courts and veterans treatment courts. The bill also includes a huge increase for programs under the Violence Against Women Act, including more than double the fiscal year 2021 amount for sexual assault victim services. A strong funding increase is also provided for grants to help reduce the appalling backlog in this country of unprocessed rape kits. This bill provides full funding for the ongoing work of the National Weather Service to help accurately predict extreme weather, including extreme heat and other forms of severe weather. I am proud that this bill makes major investments in our ability better to understand and mitigate the very real and tangible impacts of climate change, including strong increases for the important climate work being conducted by NOAA, the National Science Foundation, and NASA's Earth Science Division. This bill builds American know-how and innovation. It helps strengthen American technological and scientific competitiveness by providing a 13.5% increase for the National Science Foundation. This includes increases for both scientific research and for efforts to broaden participation in STEM education and STEM careers among underrepresented populations. This subcommittee's commitment to American leadership in space science, space exploration, and aeronautics research continues in this year's bill, which includes $25 billion for NASA, a substantial increase of more than $1.7 billion above last year. Finally, this legislation provides a new funding level of $600 million for the Legal Services Corporation in order to help greatly expand legal services for low-income people in this country. In closing, I want to thank all the members of this subcommittee on both sides of the aisle for their very hard work all year long. We can all be enormously proud of this bill. It is legislation that will do a substantial amount of good for the American people, and I do urge all members to support it, and I thank you. At this time, I recognize our ranking member, Mr. Adderholt, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Cartwright, and for bringing forth this FY22 Commerce, Justice, Science bill. And I want to thank you and your staff for all the work you've done, and I sincerely mean that for the priorities and concerns of members on this side of the aisle. And it has been a pleasure working with you and to working with your staff as you've had your inaugural time here as chairman of this subcommittee, and you have done a great job, and I appreciate your openness, your communication, your leadership through a lot of these virtual hearings, and it's good to have members that are able to be here today, and of course at some point where we can all be together. And let me just say it's good working with the full chair and also with Ranking Member Granger and their staff and trying to put this bill together. There are many things in this bill that I think we can agree on. NASA seldom, if ever, provided Congress a budget request for the Space Launch System that reflects program estimates. So I'm grateful for your efforts to provide no less than $2.64 billion for Space Launch Systems, an increase of $50 million above FY21, including $579 million for the exploration upper stage and Block 1B development. With the steadfast support of Congress, this rocket is now being stacked in Florida for its first flight, and its flight will restore our Saturn V capability and actually exceed it. Congress must ensure the future of the SLS includes a cargo variant, which in fact has long been part of the NASA plan. This capability will be integral to future lunar cargo and science missions. It is now time for the executive branch to complete multi-year acquisition plans to make long lead purchases cost-efficient and engage contractors at a full rate of production. And I would like to stress that there is strong bipartisan support for this. Receiving accurate and sufficient budget requests will help Congress and the executive branch partner to provide what is needed. Also, Chairman Cartwright, thank you for including $110 million for nuclear thermal propulsion, a level that is necessary to work toward the design of a flight demonstration by 2024. As noted by the study of the National Academy of Sciences, a vigorous plan for a safe in-space demonstration of nuclear thermal propulsion is crucial for flights as early as the 2030s. We need this technology to outcompete China as both countries continue deep space exploration. Therefore, I'm deeply disappointed that the long-standing bipartisan language requiring NASA to use $80 million for this funding for the design of a flight demonstration was not included. I believe the omission imperils the progress of and our previous investments in nuclear thermal propulsion capabilities. And this language, in my opinion, must be restored. In addition to addressing some of my key areas of NASA priorities, the bill also addresses issues impacting all of our communities. It increases funding for critical drug court, as you mentioned in your open statement, and other vital initiatives that address the opioid epidemic, as well as DNA analysis programs that are helping to eliminate sexual assault kits backlog and solve old cases. I'm very pleased that you worked with us to establish funding for a forensic nursing center of excellence. Increasing the number of sexual assault nurse examiners, particularly in rural and under-resourced areas, is crucial to ensuring that survivors are able to access appropriate care, that nurse examiners are equipped to serve as expert witnesses to help bring the offenders to justice. In addition, the bill includes strong funding for agencies that ensure compliance with our trade laws and agreements, and I'm especially pleased to see that the language for funding the aluminum imports monitoring program is included, and of course that was created by the Trump administration. The bill also advances investments in science that are critical to our economic and national security, including quantum computing, artificial intelligence, 5G research and advanced manufacturing. I also want to thank you for including strong language for Vortex Southeast program, which does really critical work to better understand the environmental factors and improve weather forecasts, especially in my home region, but also in the entire southeastern part of the United States. Unfortunately, there are several areas in which this bill does fall short. The bill unnecessarily politicizes the state and local law enforcement assistance portfolio, including the Justice Department's flagship program, the Burn JAG program. And that leads to many unanswered questions. For example, when did it become controversial to support mental health and wellness programs or active shooter training for our nation's police officers? Or how will burdening a program that supports police reform efforts at the state and local level serve anyone's purposes? And when did it become divisive to encourage the Justice Department to pay special attention to the needs of our rural law enforcement partners? It means nothing to provide millions of dollars to these programs if states and localities can't meet these partisan federal standards. And I know that my friend, the chairman of this subcommittee, has many interests to balance in this bill. But to many people, this is exactly what defunding the police looks like. In addition to this bill fails to adequately address recent unwise NASA decisions that have jeopardized the human landing system. I believe this committee must provide appropriate direction to NASA to restore foundational aspects of this program. In my opinion, the HLS program, while still in its inception, is perilously close to losing any prospects of ensuring system redundancy, not to mention market competition. This, in turn, threatens our valuable investments needed to land the first woman on the moon. The bill also eliminates several longstanding Second Amendment protections that have enjoyed historical bipartisan support, and it eliminates a prohibition on the Department of Justice paying for abortions. The removal of the hide language in the Department of Justice is yet another step too far by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. It was even a step that was a little bit too far for President Biden, given that this long-standing prohibition on taxpayer funds to pay for abortion within the Department of Justice was maintained in his, meaning President Biden's, FY22 budget request. And finally, despite locking up over $1.1 billion with unattainable preconditions, this bill simply spends way too much money. With a top-line increase of over $10 billion and double-digit increases across many of the agencies, the spending level is simply irresponsible in the absence of a broader, fiscally responsible federal budget. The lack of fiscal discipline in this bill also jeopardizes the future viability of the Crime Victims Fund, with so many additional funding in this bill, there's simply no reason to divert Crime Victims Fund balances to pay for discretionary programs. As this process moves forward, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to the opportunity to improve this bill at the full committee markup. With that said, once again, I do thank you, and I sincerely mean it, and your staff for your efforts. And I pledge to work with you to resolve the differences as we see best as we move forward. So again, thank you for your hard work, Mr. Chairman. I know you put a lot of time into it, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Adderholt. At this time, I recognize the chair of the full Committee on Appropriations, Ms. DeLauro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you and Ranking Member Adderholt for your leadership. Let me also say a thank you to the subcommittee, the front office, the personal staff for your dedication and for all of your hard work. After the devastation of the pandemic and decades of disinvestment, the American economy has left the middle class, small businesses, and the vulnerable behind. And we are confronting the existential crisis of climate change. The Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies bill before us will invest in the American people and strengthen our communities. Across the broad scope of this subcommittee, this legislation meets pressing needs, addresses some of our most serious crises, and prepares our nation for the future. Far too many communities, large and small, across this nation are suffering from economic distress and the hopelessness that comes with it. This bill reverses these trends by investing in economic development in distressed communities. It supports small businesses and creating good-paying jobs here in the United States. No matter how many jobs we create, however, our communities cannot reach their full potential unless they are safe. This bill prioritizes its safety by providing strong funding for law enforcement. The legislation makes our communities safer by funding local law enforcement who deserve our respect as they work in a period of great challenge. And it improves fairness and professionalism in policing through better policing training and independent investigations of law enforcement misconduct. In response to deadly gun violence that costs far too many American lives, this legislation directly tackles the epidemic by increasing funding for background checks and other enforcement tools that keep guns off of our streets. To address gender-based violence, the bill provides strong increases for the Violence Against Women Act Prevention and Prosecution Program and funds a national effort to reduce the backlog of unprocessed rape kits. Finally, a strong funding for civil rights enforcement, hate crimes investigations, and efforts to combat domestic violence extremism reflect our commitment to a country where every person, no matter their background, is treated with dignity and with respect. As we build a more inclusive nation, we must also prepare for the future, which requires concerted action to confront the climate crisis. This legislation provides strong funding for climate resilience and research at NASA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the National Science Foundation. These investments, like those across all of our accomplishment bills, reflect the investments like those across all of our appropriations bills. It reflects a commitment to treating this crisis with the urgency that it requires. In closing, I say thank you to Chairman Cartwright and Ranking Member Adderholt for their work, and together we can spur economic growth, we can make our communities safer, and confront the climate crisis. I urge my colleagues to support the bills, and I yield back.
Well, thank you, Chair DeLauro. At this time, I recognize the ranking member of our full committee, Ms. Granger, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Cartwright. Thank you for presenting the fiscal year 2022 Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies Appropriations Bill. I also want to recognize and thank my friend, the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Adderholt. I know both of you, and I know you've worked together to address priorities of members on both sides of the aisle, and I thank you for that. The Commerce, Justice, Science Bill always supports initiatives that strengthen the ability of the United States to be competitive around the world. Invest in cutting-edge research and technology and protect children in our communities. And we thank you for that. Unfortunately, this year's bill is overshadowed by partisan politics and balanced spending priorities. This comes at a time we know our nation is facing increasing threats on a daily basis, such as cyber attacks on American companies and our government, extortion plots and critical infrastructure, and a seemingly endless flow of deadly drugs made in China coming across our southern border. Instead of prioritizing these security challenges, this bill instead focuses on funding of new, overlapping, and potentially duplicative programs that may not even be useful for our local communities. State and local grant programs are increased by an astounding $1.6 billion, with much of this funding conditioned on policies far outside the control of our local law enforcement officers. This is unacceptable. It will keep our local officials from pursuing their own police reform agendas. Even worse, funds that might otherwise be available for body cameras and bulletproof vests, investigations, or overtime will be withheld indefinitely. There are several other items that concern me as well. The bill doesn't include a long-standing pro-life provision regarding the use of Justice Department funds. In addition, language carried for many years to protect Second Amendment rights is stripped from the bill. Still, I'm encouraged that the bill includes strong funding for NASA. It is essential that the United States maintain our path toward renewed space dominance. In closing, this develop appropriations bills with bipartisan support that can be signed into law. The Commerce, Justice, Science bill supports agendas that combat criminal threats, ensure compliance with our trade laws, and enable us to effectively counter China. We cannot allow it to be delayed. Time is of the essence, and I hope we can get to work. I look forward to addressing these concerns as this process moves forward. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Well, thank you, Ms. Granger. Are there any other members of this subcommittee who wish to speak? Hearing none. Does any member wish to offer an amendment at this time? Hearing none. I recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Meng, for a motion, and I ask for your support of this bill. Ms. Meng?
Mr. Chairman, I move to favorably report the Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriations Act of 2022 to the full committee.
And the question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. I ask that members leave the copies of the bills and reports on the dais. And I do ask unanimous consent that the staff be permitted to make technical and conforming changes to this bill and report just approved. Seeing no objection, so ordered. And without objection, this meeting is adjourned.